explore mythology through academic scholarship.
Subscribe to the channel.
Cassandra, the myth and its evolution. The unheard voice, a narrative journey. On the Cyclopean walls of Troy, at dusk, a young princess with long black hair and a white peplos stood, her gaze fixed on the horizon. It was Cassandra, the most beautiful of Priam's daughters, and she was the first to glimpse the chariot approaching in the vast plain, carrying Hector's body. With a cry that broke the silence, she summoned the Trojan women, initiating the collective lament. At that moment, her words were heard and her sorrow shared. She was not yet the unheard prophetess, but the witness who saw the present and called for mourning.
Years later, in the realm of the dead, Agamemnon's shade would recount his end. Returning from Troy with the spoils of war, including Cassandra, he was welcomed to Mycenae by Clytemnestra. But the hospitality was a deadly deception. Agamemnon was murdered, and Cassandra, the Trojan princess, now a slave and concubine, died beside him at Clytemnestra's hand. Her pitiful cry was the last sound the king heard. She was a sacrificial victim whose fate was inextricably intertwined with the domestic violence of the Atreidae, an echo of Troy's destruction reverberating in Greece.
But her figure was destined to transform. In the poems of the epic cycle, Cassandra first emerged as a prophetess. In the Cypria, even before Paris departed for Sparta, she prophesied the disasters that would ensue, but her words were ignored. In the Iliupersis, when the Trojans brought the wooden horse within the walls, Cassandra warned in vain that it concealed a trick and would lead to ruin. Once again, she was unheard. During the sack of the city, she was abducted by Ajax the Lesser at the Temple of Athena, a sacrilegious act that would seal the fate of the victors. Her gift was now explicitly linked to Apollo, and the curse of being unheard was fully operational.
Her tragedy reached its climax in Aeschylus's Agamemnon. Brought to Argos as a slave and concubine of the king, Cassandra remained silent for a long time, a silence heavy with omens. Then, in a prophetic trance, she uttered visions incomprehensible to the chorus of Argive elders. She prophesied her own death and Agamemnon's, revealing the past crimes of the house of Atreus, such as Thyestes' banquet. Her curse was to be disbelieved, even though she spoke the truth. Before entering the palace, where she knew she would meet her death, she cast down her prophetic insignia, a gesture of desperate renunciation. Her voice, though revealing horror, was destined to remain unheard, a perennial warning about truth that cannot persuade.
Subscribe to the channel.
In Euripides' Trojan Women, Cassandra appeared in a state of ecstasy, dancing with wedding torches and singing a bridal hymn for her marriage to Agamemnon. Her madness was in reality a terrible lucidity, which allowed her to see the ruin of the Greeks and the false glory of their victory. She prophesied the death of Agamemnon and her own, and the destruction of the Greek fleet. She was a figure of ritual rebellion whose apparent joy concealed a deep awareness of the impending catastrophe.
Subscribe to the channel.
In a lost tragedy by Euripides, the Alexandros, Cassandra recognized Paris, who had returned to Troy after being abandoned. She prophesied that the young man, if welcomed, would lead to the destruction of the city. But her words were mistaken for madness, and her parents, blinded by the joy of reunion, ignored her. Her fate was already sealed. The truth she bore was too painful to be accepted. Lycophron, in his Hellenistic poem Alexandra, imprisoned her in a tower from which she uttered an enigmatic monologue. Her prophecies, obscure and elusive, ranged from the fall of Troy to the rise of Rome, uniting myth with history. Her voice, reported by a guard, was an uninterrupted flow of visions, a labyrinthine and isolated knowledge, incomprehensible to anyone who did not possess the key to decipher it.
Finally, in Pseudo-Apollodorus's Bibliotheca, the myth of Cassandra found its definitive arrangement. Here it is narrated that Apollo, enamored with her, offered her the gift of prophecy. When Cassandra refused him, the gods spat in her mouth, condemning her to speak the truth without ever being believed. This version, with the archaic variant of snakes licking her ears, became the most widespread, fixing the image of the unheard prophetess as an archetype. Her fate was fulfilled with the sacrilege of Ajax the Lesser, who violated her in Athena's temple, unleashing divine wrath and the destruction of the victors. Thus, from a Trojan princess who saw the present, Cassandra became the unheard prophetess, whose voice, though bearing truth, was destined to clash with human disbelief. Her figure, stratified through the centuries, has continued to resonate, embodying the paradox of knowledge and the eternal struggle between truth and its acceptance. Modern interpretations have then reread Cassandra through different lenses. Erwin Rhodey sees her as a paradigm of ecstatic Mantic, whose overwhelming and incommunicable truth is a direct experience of the divine. Jane Ellen Harrison interprets her as a figure rooted in ancient chthonic traditions, whose unheardness reflects the suppression of female religious authority by the Olympian patriarchy. Walter F. Otto elevates her to an incarnation of Apollonian truth, a divine clarity too intense for human reason, making her unheardness an ontological consequence of her proximity to the divine. Jean-Pierre Vernant places her at the center of the communication crisis between mythical and rational thought, a symbol of the disjunction between truth and social authority. Walter Burkert sees her as a sacrificial victim whose unheard prophecies and death are linked to the ritualistic structures of violence and miasma. Marcel Detienne interprets her as the rupture of the archaic model of the master of truth, a truth without persuasion in a world where sacred speech has lost its efficacy. Luc Brisson focuses on the linguistic regime of myth, seeing in Cassandra the bearer of an oracular code that clashes with civic language. Maurizio Bettini analyzes her as a figure of the communicative paradox, where her social marginality, woman, foreigner, slave, neutralizes her truth. Finally, Fritz Graf frames her within the institutional context of Mantic, where her lack of institutional legitimacy contributes to her unheardness. Cassandra thus emerges as a polysemic figure, capable of traversing different historical contexts and theoretical paradigms. The phrase, "she who speaks the truth and is not believed," is not a starting point, but the result of a long and stratified evolution, a cultural device that reflects the changing ways of understanding truth, communication, and the human condition through the centuries.
Subscribe to the channel.
The Analytical and Bibliographical Apparatus. This section compiles the detailed analysis of ancient sources and modern interpretations of Cassandra, providing the theoretical context and academic references for the narrative presented in the first part of the work. Part 1. Ancient Sources, Detailed Analysis. Chapter 1. Cassandra in the Iliad. 1.1. Textual Placement. The figure of Cassandra appears in the Iliad, a traditionally dated poem to the end of the 8th century BCE, at two distinct moments. The most extensive and significant mention is found in Book 24, in the concluding section of the poem, which narrates the return of Hector's body to Troy. However, the character is already introduced in Book 13, verses 363 to 370, where she is cited as the most beautiful among Priam's daughters in relation to the death of her suitor, Othryoneus. While in Book 13, Cassandra is an object of desire and marital diplomacy, her actual on-stage appearance as an active subject occurs at the moment of final mourning, not during combat. 1.2. The scene in Book 24. After supplicating Achilles in his tent, Priam brings his son's body back on a chariot drawn by mules towards the city walls. The text describes the approach of the convoy in an atmosphere of suspense and silence. Cassandra is positioned on the citadel of Pergamon, in an elevated position relative to the city. The poet compares her to golden Aphrodite, emphasizing her beauty and regal dignity. She is the first to glimpse the approaching chariot. No one else, among men and women, notices the convoy before her. She immediately recognizes her father, the chariot, the outstretched body. She instantly understands the nature of the event. She raises her voice and summons the Trojan women, inviting them to leave their homes to witness the return of dead Hector. Her cry breaks the silence and inaugurates the collective lament. After her announcement, Andromache, Hecuba, and Helen will deliver the three great funeral orations that conclude the poem. 1.3. Narrative function. In the context of the Iliad, Cassandra performs a precise function. 1. She is the first witness to the event. 2. She mediates between the outside, the plain, and the inside, the city. 3. She activates the ritual of mourning. Her spatial position is significant. Placed on the walls, she occupies a liminal space between inside and outside, between war and city, between event and community. She is not yet defined as an inspired prophetess. She is not associated with Apollo, nor characterized by the curse of incredulity. Her words are heard and produce an immediate effect. 1.4. Significant absences. The Iliad does not mention any mantic gift granted by Apollo, any rejection of the deity, any punishment that renders her words ineffective, any explicit prediction of Troy's future fall. Cassandra is a regal figure integrated into the civic fabric. Her function is consistent with the female system of the poem, in which women intervene in moments of crisis through ritual lament. 1.5. Emerging profile. From the analysis of the Homeric passage, Cassandra emerges as a Trojan princess, a visual mediator, the inaugural voice of mourning, a figure fully integrated into the community. The configuration of the unheeded prophetess is not attested at this stage. The original core documented is that of anticipatory vision in the present, not of ineffective prediction of the future. 1.6. Conclusion. In the oldest preserved layer of the epic tradition, Cassandra is not yet the tragic figure of ineffective truth. She is a young, regal woman who sees first and summons collective sorrow. This fact constitutes the necessary starting point for any subsequent analysis of the myth's evolution.
Chapter 2. Cassandra in the Odyssey. 2.1. Textual placement. The second archaic attestation of Cassandra's figure is found in the Odyssey, a poem also datable between the end of the 8th and the beginning of the 7th century BCE.
Her presence is central in Book 11, verses 421 to 423, within the so-called Nekia, the account of Odysseus' descent into the realm of the dead. In this section, Odysseus evokes the souls of the deceased and converses with them. Among the shades that emerge is that of Agamemnon, who narrates his own death and the circumstances of his return from Troy. Cassandra appears within the deceased king's account, constituting a crucial element of the massacre scene. Agamemnon's account. Agamemnon reports having returned from Troy with part of the war spoils. Among the women brought to Greece was Cassandra, daughter of Priam. The Homeric text does not yet introduce her with explicit prophetic qualifications, but presents her as part of the royal spoils and a companion in fate to the king. At arriving in Mycenae, Agamemnon is welcomed by Clytemnestra with an apparent hospitality that proves to be a deadly deception. During the banquet, the king is killed. In the account, Cassandra's figure emerges with tragic force. Agamemnon states that she was killed beside him, Amphiamoi. He recalls hearing her piteous cry as she was slaughtered by false Clytemnestra. The text emphasizes the brutality of the act. Cassandra dies while Agamemnon himself is expiring, making the scene a picture of total and domestic violence.
2.3 Narrative Function. In the context of the Odyssey, Cassandra is not an active subject of speech. She does not deliver articulated speeches. She does not announce future events. She does not attempt to dissuade Agamemnon. She is a figure evoked in the traumatic memory of the deceased king. Her function is that of a sacrificial victim of the domestic massacre. If in the Iliad she was the mediator between the external event and the city, here she is associated with the internal violence of the house of Atreus, oikos, representing the final act of Troy's destruction reverberating in Greece.
2.4 Characterizing Elements. From the text, several fundamental traits emerge. 1. Status. Cassandra is part of the war spoils and Agamemnon's concubine. 2. Death. She dies at the hands of Clytemnestra, not Aegisthus, who deals with Agamemnon, highlighting a specific female rivalry that will be developed by subsequent tragedy. 3. Voice. Her cry is mentioned as the last sound the king heard, but it is not yet a prophetic word. The motif of incredulity is not yet explored. It is not stated that Cassandra had foreseen the murder, nor that she had attempted to warn the king. Her death is a parallel and complementary event to Agamemnon's.
2.5 Significant Absences and Future Prospects. As in the case of the Iliad, the Odyssey does not explicitly mention Apollo's prophetic gift or the curse of incredulity. However, her placement as a victim beside the king prepares the ground for subsequent Mantic evolution. The qualitative leap occurs in the poems of the epic cycle, Cypria and Iliupersis, where Cassandra finally assumes the role of prophetess. In the Cypria, she prophesies the disasters that will result from Paris's journey to Sparta. And in the Iliupersis, she warns the Trojans in vain about the wooden horse.
2.6 Conclusion. In Homeric Epic proper, Iliad and Odyssey, Cassandra is a royal and tragic figure, but not yet magical. She is the princess who sees sorrow in the present, Iliad, and the victim who shares the victor's fate, Odyssey. The structure of the unheard prophetess is an elaboration that begins with the epic cycle and will find its fullest expression in 5th century BCE Attic tragedy.
Chapter 3 Cassandra in the Epic Cycle, Cypria and Iliupersis.
3.1 Context and State of Tradition. The Trojan epic cycle comprised poems that supplemented the narratives of the Iliad and the Odyssey, covering the entire history of the war. Among these, the Cypria, attributed to Stasinus of Cyprus, narrated the origins of the conflict, while the Iliupersis, the sack of Ilion, attributed to Arctinus of Miletus, described the fall of the city. Since these works are lost, our knowledge depends on summaries by Proclus, 5th century CE, and indirect fragments. It is in this layer of tradition that the fundamental transformation occurs. Cassandra emerges for the first time as a figure endowed with prophetic powers.
3.2 The emergence of Mantic in the Cypria. In the Cypria, datable to the 7th century BCE, the first attestation of Cassandra's prophetic gift is recorded. Proclus's summary indicates that before Paris's departure for Sparta, his brother Helenus prophesies the future. Subsequently, Cassandra also prophesies about the things that will happen. Thespesizes periton melanton. This fact is crucial. For the first time, Cassandra is not just a witness to the present, as in the Iliad, but a seer who foresees catastrophe before it happens. However, her words are already marked by ineffectiveness. Despite warnings about the destructive consequences of Helen's abduction, events inexorably proceed towards war.
3.3 Cassandra and the Fall of Troy, the Iliupersis. While the Cypria deals with the antecedents, it is in the Iliupersis that Cassandra's role as the unheard prophetess during the final siege is consolidated. The Wooden Horse. According to cyclic tradition, when the Trojans bring the horse inside the walls, Cassandra warns that the structure conceals a trick and will lead to ruin. The Trojans, however, ignore her cry, preferring to believe it is a votive offering. The Sack of the City. The Iliupersis also narrated the brutal episode of her abduction at the Temple of Athena by Ajax the Lesser, an event that would become iconic in Greek art and which underscores her fate as a victim despite her superior knowledge.
3.4 Emerging Structural Elements. In the cyclic material, two elements are established that were absent in Homer. 1. The nature of the gift. Cassandra is now explicitly linked to Apollonic Mantic. Although the details of the curse, Apollo spitting in her mouth, are probably later elaborations, the connection between prophecy and being unheard is fully operational here. 2. The parallelism with Helenus. Often Cassandra acts in tandem or in parallel with her brother Helenus. While Helenus's prophecies are often technically interpreted and sometimes heard, Cassandra's have a more tragic and unheard character.
3.5 Difference from Homeric Epic. Compared to the Iliad and the Odyssey, a clear evolution is observed. Homer. Cassandra is a royal princess, beautiful like Aphrodite, a witness to lament or a war victim. Her voice is a lament, not a prediction. Epic cycle. Cassandra becomes a liminal figure, endowed with knowledge that transcends time. Her profile shifts from the civic to the religious and mantic sphere.
3.6 Conclusion. In the epic cycle, Cassandra undergoes a profound transformation, becoming the archetype of the unheard prophetess. This development lays the groundwork for her tragic representation in subsequent Attic drama, where her prophetic gift and the curse of disbelief becomes central to her character and narrative function.
Chapter 4 Cassandra in Aeschylus's Agamemnon. 4.1 Context and Dramaturgical Role. In 5th century BCE Attic tragedy, The figure of Cassandra reaches its maximum dramatic expression in Aeschylus's Agamemnon, 458 BCE, the first tragedy of the Oresteia trilogy. Here, Cassandra is no longer a marginal figure, but a co-protagonist whose appearance on stage is one of the most intense and innovative moments in Greek theater. She arrives in Argos as war booty and Agamemnon's concubine, destined to die with him. Her scene is a long prophetic monologue, verses 1072 to 1330, in dialogue with the chorus of Argive elders who do not understand her visions.
4.2 The Aeschylean Silence and the Cry to Apollo. Before her monologue, Cassandra remains silent for a long time, about 300 verses, a silence that imbues her figure with an almost sacred anticipation. When she finally speaks, her first cry is an invocation to Apollo, the god who condemned her. This Aeschylean silence is a powerful dramatic device, preparing the audience for the eruption of an unbearable truth.
4.3 Apollo's Gift and Curse. Aeschylus is the first to explicitly explore Apollo's prophetic gift and the curse of disbelief. According to tradition, which Aeschylus presupposes, Apollo, enamored with Cassandra, granted her the gift of prophecy if she would unite with him. Upon her refusal, after receiving the power, the god, in revenge, spat in her mouth, condemning her to speak the truth without ever being believed. Her words are therefore clear but ineffective.
4.4 The Vision of Time. In her monologue, Cassandra does not merely predict the future in a linear fashion. Instead, she also recalls the past of the house of Atreus, Thyestes' banquet, the devoured children, and the remote future, the arrival of Orestes as avenger. Her vision is atemporal, an eternal present that merges past, present, and future into a single horror. The chorus, anchored to human rationality, cannot decipher these fragmented and metaphorical images.
4.5 The Dialogue with the Chorus. The dialogue between Cassandra and the chorus is a dialogue of the deaf. The chorus, representing the polis and common reason, cannot accept such a destabilizing truth and mistakes it for madness. The tragedy stages the conflict between divine truth, incomprehensible and unacceptable, and the limited human capacity to understand and act accordingly.
4.6 The Despoiling and Death. Before entering the palace to face death, Cassandra performs a gesture of immense symbolic value. She casts down and tramples her prophetic insignia, scepter and fillets. It is an act of desperate renunciation of a gift that has brought her only suffering and incomprehension. Her death, which occurs off-stage, is announced by a cry, a final lament that joins Agamemnon's. 4.7 Conclusion. In Aeschylus, Cassandra becomes the archetype of the unheard prophetess, whose truth, however absolute, is destined to remain ineffective. Her figure embodies the paradox of knowledge and powerlessness, and her tragedy is a symbol of the human difficulty in confronting an ineluctable fate and a truth one does not wish to accept. Chapter 5 Cassandra in Euripides' Trojan Women. 5.1 Context and Euripides' Reworking. In Euripides' Trojan Women, 415 BCE, Cassandra appears in a context of profound reflection on war and its consequences. The tragedy, performed shortly after the destruction of Melos by Athens, is a bitter meditation on the suffering of the vanquished. Euripides reworks the figure of Cassandra, accentuating her dimension of fury and Bacchic madness, but also her critical lucidity. 5.2
the wedding song, and the torches. Cassandra enters the stage in a state of ecstasy, dancing with wedding torches and singing a bridal hymn for her union with Agamemnon. This gesture is deeply ironic and subversive. The torches, symbols of wedding joy, become omens of destruction. The task of carrying wedding torches belonged to the bride's mother, Hecuba, and the fact that Cassandra does so is an act of ritual rebellion that upearns roles and meanings. 5.3. Madness as strategy and lucidity. The chorus and Hecuba interpret her behavior as pure madness, menas. However, in her speech, she reveals extraordinary lucidity. She prophesies her own death and Agamemnon's, the destruction of the Greek fleet, and the sufferings awaiting the victors. Her madness is a strategy to speak the truth in an unacceptable way, but also a form of resistance. She demonstrates that the Trojans, though vanquished, are happier than the Greeks because they fought for their homeland and died gloriously, while the Greeks will return home to die miserably. 5.4. Invocations and omens. Cassandra invokes Hecate, goddess of crossroads and the underworld, and Apollo, her god. Her prophecies are dense with images of blood and ruin. Her figure is that of a prophetess who, though unheard, does not refrain from proclaiming the truth, transforming her very condition as a victim into an indictment against the violence of war. 5.5. Conclusion. Euripides presents Cassandra, who, while retaining the trait of disbelief, is more active and verbally aggressive than Aeschylus's. Her madness is a veil that conceals a profound critical lucidity and a capacity for political analysis that unmasks the rhetoric of victory. She is a figure who embodies the suffering of the vanquished and the denunciation of the brutality of war.
Chapter 6. Cassandra in Euripides' Alexandros. 6.1. Context and fragments. Euripides' Alexandros is a lost tragedy, part of the trilogy of 415 BCE, along with the Trojan women and Palamedes. Its plot has been reconstructed thanks to papyrological finds, Strasbourg and Oxyrhynchus papyri, and indirect citations. The work narrated the recognition of Paris, also called Alexandros, abandoned at birth and later found. Cassandra played a crucial role in this initial phase of the Trojan story. 6.2. The recognition of Paris and the prophecy. In the tragedy, Paris, raised as a shepherd, participates in funeral games in his honor, believed dead. He is recognized by Hecuba and Priam, who welcome him with joy. Cassandra, however, is the only one to recognize in him the torch that will set Troy ablaze, as foretold by Hecuba's dream before his birth. She prophesies that the welcoming of Paris will lead to the destruction of the city. 6.3. Disbelief and madness. Once again, Cassandra's words are mistaken for madness. Her parents, blinded by the joy of reunion, ignore her warnings. Euripidean tragedy stages the paradox of unheard truth in a context of human happiness, making Cassandra's curse even crueler. Her lucidity is perceived as an unwelcome interruption of collective joy. 6.4. Cassandra as narrative bridge. The Alexandros, though a tragedy in itself, serves as an ideal prologue to the Trojan women. Cassandra, with her unheard prophecy about Paris, establishes the causal link between the beginning of the catastrophe and its conclusion. Her figure is a narrative and conceptual bridge that unites the different moments of the Trojan War, showing how the city's fate was already sealed from the outset. 6.5. Conclusion.
In the Alexandros, Euripides anticipates the theme of unheard truth, placing Cassandra at the center of a family drama that transforms into a collective tragedy. Her figure is that of a seer whose lucidity is unacceptable to the community, unable to see beyond the happiness of the present towards the inevitable future catastrophe.
Chapter 7. Cassandra in Lycophron's Alexandra. 7.1. Context and Narrative Framework. Lycophron's Alexandra, or Cassandra, a Hellenistic poem from the 3rd century BCE, is a monologic poem of 1474 iambic trimeters, famous for its obscurity and linguistic complexity. The work is structured as a long prophetic monologue by Cassandra, reported by a guard to Priam. Cassandra is imprisoned in a tower from which she utters her visions, which the guard faithfully reports to the king. 7.2. Prophecies and Obscurity. The Alexandra is a vaticium ex eventu. Cassandra prophesies events that have already occurred or are known to the Hellenistic audience. Her prophecies cover the entire history of Troy, but also extend to future and remote events, such as the founding of Rome and the deeds of its descendants, Aeneas. Her language is extremely obscure, rich in paraphrases, mythological allusions, and enigmatic names. For example, Paris is the wolf. This obscurity is not merely stylistic, but reflects the very nature of prophecy, which manifests through enigmas rather than through direct clarity. 7.3. The Curse and Isolation. In Lycophron, Apollo's curse is fully operational. Cassandra speaks the truth, but no one believes her. Her isolation in the tower is a metaphor for her condition. Her knowledge is separated from the community, and her voice is ineffective. The guard, who acts as a mediator, does not understand the meaning of her words, but reports them faithfully, emphasizing the incommunicability of prophecy. 7.4. Cassandra as encyclopedic figure. The Alexandra is an erudite work typical of Hellenism. Cassandra becomes a vehicle for Lycophron to display his vast mythological and geographical knowledge. Her prophecies are a catalog of myths and legends, ranging from the Greek to the Eastern world and even to Italy. The figure of Cassandra transforms into a kind of living encyclopedia of mythical knowledge. 7.5. Conclusion. Lycophron presents a Cassandra whose figure is dominated by obscurity and isolation. Her prophecy is an uninterrupted flow of enigmatic visions, mixing myth and history, and reflecting the complexity and erudition of the Hellenistic age. Her being unheard is an existential condition, not merely a divine punishment. Chapter 8. Cassandra in Pseudo-Apollodorus's Bibliotheca and the Mythographic Synthesis. 8.1. Context and Function. Pseudo-Apollodorus's Bibliotheca, 1st to 2nd century CE, is a work of mythography that systematically collects and organizes the entire corpus of Greek myths. It is not an original work, but a compilation that had an enormous influence on subsequent tradition, becoming a fundamental source for the knowledge of myths. In it, the myth of Cassandra finds its definitive arrangement, summarizing the different variants and establishing the canonical version. 8.2. Apollo's Gift and Curse. The Bibliotheca, Book 3, Chapter 12, Section 5, narrates that Apollo, enamored with Cassandra, promised her the gift of prophecy if she would unite with him. Cassandra accepted the gift, but then refused to unite with the god. Apollo, in revenge, spat in her mouth, condemning her to speak the truth without ever being believed. This is the most widespread and influential version of the myth, which fixed the image of the unheard prophetess. 8.3. Variants and Details.
Apollodorus also mentions an archaic version of the myth, according to which Cassandra and her brother Helenus received the gift of prophecy after snakes licked their ears in Apollo's temple. This older version is a remnant of chthonic and shamanic beliefs related to Mantic. The epitome of the Bibliotheca, Epitome 5, chapter 22, describes the sacrilege of Ajax the Lesser, who violated Cassandra in Athena's temple during the sack of Troy. This act unleashed divine wrath and was the cause of the shipwreck and destruction of many Greek heroes on their return home. Cassandra's fate is here inextricably linked to the divine punishment of the victors. 8.4. Cassandra as archetype. In the Bibliotheca, Cassandra becomes the archetype of the unheard prophetess, whose story is a warning about the fragility of truth in the face of human disbelief and divine vengeance. Her figure is a point of reference for all subsequent reinterpretations of the myth. 8.5. Conclusion of Part 1. Part 1 of this study has traced the evolution of Cassandra's figure from her first attestations in Homeric Epic to Pseudo-Apollodorus's mythographic arrangement. We have observed how from a Trojan princess, a witness to lament and a war victim, Cassandra progressively transformed into the unheard prophetess, whose voice, though bearing truth, is destined to clash with disbelief and incomprehension. This evolution, which consolidates in the epic cycle and reaches its maximum expression in Attic tragedy, lays the groundwork for complex modern reinterpretations.
Part 2. Modern Interpretations. Detailed Analysis. Chapter 9. Erwin Rhody and Ecstatic Mantic. 9.1. Theoretical Context. Erwin Rhody, 1845 to 1898, an eminent German classical philologist and friend of Friedrich Nietzsche, dedicated important studies to the irrational and ecstatic elements of Greek religion. In his monumental work Psyche, The Cult of Souls and Belief in Immortality Among the Greeks, 1890 to 1894, Rhody explored the origins of soul cults and beliefs in immortality, emphasizing the Dionysian and ecstatic aspects often overlooked by rationalistic interpretations of Greek culture. In this framework, Cassandra becomes a key figure for understanding ecstatic prophecy. 9.2. Mantic and Ecstasy. Rhody distinguishes two forms of mantic, divination, in ancient Greece. Mantiki entechnos, technical mantic, based on the interpretation of signs, for example, entrails, bird flight, which is rational and institutionalized. And mantiki atechnos, ecstatic mantic, characterized by divine possession, enthusiasmos, and an altered state of consciousness in which the prophet becomes a vehicle for the god. This is the realm of figures like the Pythia and Cassandra. Cassandra, for Rhody, embodies this form of ecstatic and non-technical prophecy. Her visions are not the result of rational deduction, but of a direct and overwhelming experience of the divine.
Chapter 10. Jane Ellen Harrison and the Ritualist Interpretation. 10.1. Theoretical Context. Jane Ellen Harrison, 1850 to 1928, was a leading figure among the Cambridge Ritualists, a group of scholars who revolutionized the study of Greek religion and mythology in the early 20th century. In works such as Prolegomena to the Study of Greek Religion, 1903, and Themis, a study of the social origins of Greek religion, 1912, Harrison argued that myth is not merely a story, but a verbalized ritual, reflecting ancient practices and beliefs, particularly those related to fertility cults and chthonic deities. From this perspective, the myth of Cassandra is reinterpreted through the lens of ritual and social dynamics.
Chapter 11. Walter F. Otto and the Phenomenology of the Divine. 11.1. Theoretical Context. Walter F. Otto, a German classical philologist and philosopher of religion, offered a phenomenological approach to Greek mythology, emphasizing the direct apprehension of the divine, thus Heilige, as it manifests in the gods. In his fundamental work, The Gods of Greece, 1929, Otto sought to understand the Greek gods not as mere anthropomorphic projections, but as fundamental forms of being, each embodying a distinct aspect of reality. In this framework, Cassandra is reinterpreted as a figure who directly experiences and articulates the essence of Apollo. Chapter 12. Jean-Pierre Vernant and the Crisis of Tragic Ambiguity. 12.1. Theoretical Context. Jean-Pierre Vernant, a leading figure of the Paris School of Historical Anthropology, revolutionized the study of ancient Greece by applying structuralist and anthropological methods to myth, tragedy, and philosophy. In works such as Myth and Thought Among the Greeks, 1965, and Myth and Tragedy in Ancient Greece, 1972, with Pierre Vidal-Naquet, Vernant explored the tensions and ambiguities inherent in Greek thought, particularly the transition from mythical to rational modes of understanding. Cassandra, for Vernant, embodies the crisis of communication and the tragic ambiguity of knowledge in the nascent polis. Chapter 13. Walter Burkert and the Anthropological-Religious Interpretation. 13.1. Theoretical Context. Walter Burkert, 1931 to 2015, an eminent classicist and historian of religions, developed an anthropological approach to Greek religion, emphasizing the deep biological and ritualistic roots of myth and cult. In works such as Homo Nekons, The Anthropology of Sacrificial Rite and Myth in Ancient Greece, 1972, and Greek Religion, 1977, Burkert argued that Greek religion is fundamentally shaped by archaic patterns of violence, sacrifice, and the management of pollution, miasma. In this framework, Cassandra is reinterpreted not only as a prophetess, but as a sacrificial victim whose fate is deeply intertwined with the ritualistic structures of Greek society. Chapter 14. Marcel Détienne and the Crisis of Authoritative Speech. 14.1. Theoretical Context. Marcel Détienne, 1935 to 1919, in works such as The Masters of Truth in Archaic Greece, 1967, and Apollo with the Knife in Hand, 1979, developed an analysis of the notion of truth, aletheia, in archaic Greece. His interest focused not on a single character, but on the figures who, in archaic society, held and administered truth. In this framework, Cassandra becomes a particularly significant case. Chapter 15. Luc Brisson and the Regime of Inspired Discourse. 15.1. Theoretical Context. Luc Brisson, starting from the 1980s, has dedicated numerous studies to the status of myth and the nature of inspired discourse in ancient Greece. His interest focuses on the functioning of mythical language and the difference between mythos and logos. Within this reflection, Cassandra's prophetic word constitutes a paradigmatic case. Chapter 16. Maurizio Bettini and the Communicative Paradox. 16.1. Methodological Context.
Maurizio Bettini, starting from the 1990s, has developed an anthropological approach to the study of the ancient world, focusing on the symbolic and cultural functioning of myths. In his theoretical framework, myth is not merely a traditional narrative or a simple religious residue. It is a cultural device that stages tensions and deep structures of society. Cassandra becomes, from this perspective, a paradigmatic figure of the communicative problem.
Chapter 17. Fritz Graf and the Institutionalization of Mantic. 17.1. Theoretical Context. Fritz Graf, born 1944, an eminent classical philologist and historian of religions, has studied extensively Greek mythology and religious practices. In works such as Greek Mythology, An Introduction, 1993, and his studies on Apollo, Graf emphasizes the institutional and ritualistic aspects of Greek religion, arguing that myths are often deeply intertwined with cultic practices and social structures. His approach allows for understanding Cassandra not simply as a mythical figure, but as a reflection of the dynamics of prophecy within the broader religious and political landscape of ancient Greece.
General conclusion. Cassandra, evolution of a myth. The chronological analysis of ancient sources and modern interpretations allows us to delineate the evolution of Cassandra's figure as a stratified process. From the Trojan princess of the Iliad to Aeschylus's tragic prophetess, from Lycophron's encyclopedic voice to Pseudo-Apollodorus's mythographic arrangement, the myth is progressively constructed. The phrase, "she who speaks the truth and is not believed," is not a starting point, but the result of a long evolution. Modern interpretations have highlighted different aspects: ecstatic experience, by Rode; ritual structure, by Harrison; epiphany of the divine, by Otto; tragic function in the polis, by Vernant; religious system and miasma, by Burkert; crisis of authoritative speech, by Détienne; linguistic regime of myth, by Brisson; communicative paradox, by Bettini; institutionalization of Mantic, by Graf. Cassandra emerges as a polysemic figure, capable of traversing different historical contexts and theoretical paradigms. Her journey from Homeric princess to tragic archetype, and then to the object of profound academic inquiry, demonstrates the enduring power and adaptability of her myth. She is not simply a character, but a cultural device that reflects the changing ways of understanding truth, communication, and the human condition through the centuries.
Subscribe to the channel.
If this content pleased you, I invite you to like it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next videos. Your support truly encourages me to keep creating content like this.